Welcome back to the PI Files, where we dig into real cases, real people, and the role of private investigators in uncovering the truth. I'm your host, Eric Peterson. I'm a licensed private investigator here in California. Today on the PI Files, I'm joined by a guest who's not your typical personal injury attorney. Shaun Phillips, founder of Benchmark Injury Law, is a legal professional who built his firm on something we don't always hear enough about in the industry: values. Shaun set out to create something better for his clients, not just sharp legal representation, but a practice rooted in fairness, compassion, and exceptional client service. He's the kind of attorney who challenges the stereotypes around personal injury law and stands proudly with those people he represents, people who've endured real trauma and fought hard to reclaim their lives. His motto: work hard, do the right thing, and put clients first. That's exactly what he's done. And today we're going to get into the heart of what drives him, what he's seen in the trenches, and why doing the right thing the right way still matters. Shaun, thank you very much and welcome to the PI Files.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for that nice intro as well.
Yeah, I know you're busy, so I really appreciate this. To start, can you just tell me what led you to pursue a career in personal injury?
Honestly, happenstance. When I was going through law school, I never gave personal injury like even one thought. And it wasn't until a professor had recommended me to a position after my first year in law school, just interning at a solo practitioner's office in Newport. I liked what I was doing, but I was still interested in pursuing family law of all the areas of law. When I graduated law school and I finished the bar, the guy that I worked for called me back and he's like, "Hey, we're busy. Why don't you come work for us?" Until you figure out what you're doing, of course. Like nobody anticipated it was going to be permanent. And then I ended up staying there for like 6 years.
Oh, wow.
I really enjoyed the work. It's a really unique area of law because it's, you get to practice issues that relate to medical insurance, science, like medical science, right? Talking about the injuries and stuff, contracts, like it brings in all these different areas of law. And, people really do value what we do for them. And that makes it meaningful. So it's something that really stuck with me.
What made you branch out on your own?
Even as a kid, I think I always had that entrepreneurial spirit. Mm-hmm. When you're a brand new lawyer, you come right out of law school, you don't know a damn thing. You may think you do, but like as soon as you get day one practice, like you know nothing. So I think that sort of, I don't want to say killed those dreams, but like I wasn't focused on doing my own thing. I was just focused on learning. And I fortunately had a great mentor. But then I got to the point where I was like pretty comfortable in my shoes. I was like, okay, I could do this on my own. And that entrepreneurial spirit kind of came back and it all just kind of fell into place.
And then some of the work that you did with that previous firm, was it a lot of just trial by fire? And like you said, there's different sciences and maybe different experts and different aspects of cases. So did you run the whole gamut on that?
Yeah, I did. I mean, honestly, it seems like my whole career has been trial by fire. I mean, my very first trial I got thrown into, and I'm independent. Like I'm precocious and I tend to like really think things through in the beginning. So I think a lot of people, including my mentor, was kind of like, well, let's let him like figure it out and we'll put some training wheels on, some guide rails in case he goes too far off the path. But I don't think I ever really did. I know when to ask for help and stuff. So yeah, that's just kind of how I learn, is just get thrown into it and sink or swim mentality.
Yeah. And that's true in business and then obviously in law and what we do. What inspired the name Benchmark Injury Law?
The naming that took a while. That was a long process. I'd say it probably took 6 months or more to like settle on a name because I'm very OCD, so of course I want everything to be perfect, even though obviously that never happened. But I didn't want to use my name because I felt like it was too boring. I didn't want to be like law offices of Shaun Phillips. Like to me, that was just not the vibe I was going for. And then like Benchmark was cool because it's like symbolic, right? You set the benchmark, you set the standard, and that's something that I felt resonated. And then also like it was cool with the letters and it fit with the gavel and the B and like, so from a visual aspect, it kind of just worked out.
It's a great name. And your sister works with you?
She does.
And then how many other employees do you have?
Well, I started with just myself and Kelsey, my sister. And then, about after a year and a half, we added Priscilla, who's somebody that I'd worked with when I first started as well. And then we added Selah. And then more recently, we just added another attorney, Trisha.
Oh, great. Now,
somehow they all ended up being women. I ended up in an office full of women.
That's what I have too with my business.
Yeah.
I didn't set out to do that, but here we are.
Here we are.
So it works out. So it's interesting, personal injury, and then you were thinking about family law. Some of those, there's a lot of people in both of those injuries, a lot of lawyers in both those injuries that don't help you guys in terms of reputation, when people talk about attorneys. And so hopefully we can help clarify this. And do people have a misunderstanding about, your work, what you do? There's always these kind of blanket ambulance chaser things and all that. What is something people misunderstand about what you guys do?
I think there's two misconceptions that actually really bother me. One is from other lawyers, and the second one is from everybody else. So with respect to like lawyers, when they look at personal injury, they think like, oh, that's easy, anyone can do that.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, anybody can do anything, but to do it well, it actually is. It takes a lot of skill and it takes a lot of practice, because like we talked about in the beginning, you are bringing in all of these different types of issues, right? It's not just focusing on one type of thing like business disputes or divorce, right? It sometimes even divorce plays a role in our personal injury cases, right? Because we get a settlement for a client and they're getting divorced, and then it becomes an issue of like, oh my gosh, well, now we have this settlement. Is it community property? Is it not community property? So personal injury like involves a lot of different aspects. So for any lawyer to think like, oh, I'll just jump into that and be great at it, misconception. The other misconception is the one that's promulgated by the insurance industry. They've done a really good job with their lobbyists of painting personal injury lawyers to be very greedy and that ambulance chaser, kind of stereotype. And like you said, like unfortunately there are some folks out there that really paint that picture. They don't help us, but if you do it right, we do good work. We really do help people.
I know you've probably got a lot of these, but can you tell us about one of the more unusual cases you've handled?
Yeah, there are a lot of them, but there's one that sticks out. No, there's many that stick out in my mind. One was when I was pretty early on in my career. It was a case where there was an elderly woman and she lived in an apartment, and her neighbors were really heavy smokers. And over the years, she was complaining about like the smoke that would come through, and she was saying that they were running a catering business as well. So, smoke from cooking as well was added on top of that. And she was eventually diagnosed with COPD, which is a really serious, lung disease. Mm-hmm. And I remember the first time she contacted our office, and I was kind of like, well, this isn't an auto accident. This isn't slip and fall. This isn't a trip and fall. Like, what do we do with this case? And how do we demonstrate like that? The neighbors were smoking to such a degree that it could cause COPD, and how do we also, create the evidence? Like, do we do air testing? Do we take samples from, the walls or in the HVAC, Mm-hmm. And so I kind of was like, well, I'll write a demand letter and we'll see if we can get anywhere. Well, silly me. I mean, this was a large property that was owned by like some institutional property owner that was backed by JP Morgan Chase, and then this multinational, property management company. So they were like, who's this like random guy we've never heard of? Like, no, go away, right? So then that pissed me off, because as I started looking into this, it became real, and this lady was really suffering, and everybody was saying that she's wrong, like you're just making this up. Well, it turns out she wasn't making it up, and she did have COPD, and I ended up filing a lawsuit against 5 different defendants, 3 of them, like I said, these huge entities. And the reason I remember this case is when we went to mediation, the case did resolve confidentially at mediation, but when we went to mediation, there was a gentleman from the board of directors from JP Morgan Chase that told the mediator, I hate this case. And I just thought that was so cool that I was able to like work my way up to that high. Like I didn't, it didn't start out that way. I had no idea where this case was going to go, but I thought that was pretty cool.
There was a thorn in his side.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And wow, that's quite an impact, because he's probably been through a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself explaining to clients when a case may not be legally actionable?
All the time.
Yeah.
We get a lot of calls, and unfortunately, it's just not legally actionable stuff. The burden of proof is on the person claiming, the injuries. Somebody did something wrong to me and caused these injuries, right? But the burden of proof lies on that person. So, we have to evaluate these cases from the beginning if we think they're going to be successful. And, you can sue anybody for everything. That's what I tell anybody. You can sue anyone for anything, for sure. Go for it. But it doesn't mean you're going to win. It doesn't mean it's going to be fruitful. It doesn't mean you're going to get anything out of it.
Now, do most of the cases settle like the one that you mentioned, or are there times where you're in court for quite some time?
I would say 90% of all cases settle at some stage. Let's say 50% of cases can resolve pre-litigation without having to file a lawsuit, that informal settlement. And then the other half, we do have to file a lawsuit and get, into the trenches. And, sometimes it's after a year we settle at a mediation. Sometimes, it's 2 years. Sometimes it's 3 years. I've had cases that go on for 4 years. It really just depends on who you're fighting and, the individual facts of the case.
Now, when you mentioned that other experience with the board member, is there a courtroom experience that stands out in your career, during trial or depositions or anything like that?
Definitely. My very first trial. And this was before I had even passed the bar. I had just graduated law school, and I had about like a week and a half before our ceremony. So while everybody else was like partying after law school, I was at the time working in the Pima County in Tucson, the Pima County Public Defender's Office. And my supervisor was like, "You're going to do a trial." And I was like, "I am? I just graduated law school. I got about a week before I start studying for the bar. Like, okay." So I did that trial, and like, not just like had one witness examination. Like, we divided it up, and I did opening statement. And I remember getting up there in front of the jury and just blacking out. I totally lost all of my words, and I don't know how long like I was standing there looking like a fool. But I'll never forget that experience, because it wasn't about being unprepared. It was just about inexperience and not appreciating the circumstances, right? You don't really know it until it happens to you. So I'm happy that that happened to me early on, so that I could like deal with that going forward.
Yeah, and regardless of how much experience you have, I mean, it's nerve-wracking for everybody. Somebody that's testifying, whether it's a depo or a trial or something, it's nuts. I mean, yeah.
It is, because we work on contingency. The clients are counting on you to win, right?
Yeah.
Because they have a lot invested in this, right? Isn't it? A lot of people think it's about the money, and of course it is about the money, because that's all we can do. We can't take away the fact that somebody's leg was broken, right? We give them money to compensate them for that, but after some point, it stops being about the money. The money's symbolic for justice, for like that validation that something happened to me and somebody else is sorry for it.
Yeah. And obviously at the beginning, we talked about missions and your values and all of that, but you really got to do a great preliminary evaluation of your cases right from that phone call. Are there times where you're going down a road and you're like, oh man, because you're spending money when you're not working on something that's making you money. So how do you do that?
Yeah, you have to do your best to anticipate the pitfalls in a case. And, with experience, you get better and more accurate. But at the same time, some things you just don't know until you know. If you remember a while back, Samsung had all of those batteries that were exploding, and in particular, like in the vape devices, and they were like setting people on fire and like causing really serious burns. So I had one of those cases, and long story short, I couldn't have anticipated that there was a piece of the battery that was missing, but was very important to demonstrate that battery actually belonged to Samsung. But I didn't know that, because that was my first case like that, and it wasn't until we got the experts involved and stuff that they were like, "Oh, hey, we have a burden of proof issue here, because we're missing this piece in the battery." So then we had to like really think of creative ways to demonstrate that the battery actually was Samsung's battery, and we ended up doing that by multiple witnesses and doing kind of a chain of custody type argument. And thankfully, we actually had a motion for summary judgment that was granted against us, so the case was going to get tossed. But on oral argument, I was able to get the judge to see that there was an issue of fact that was in dispute. And so, you need a triable issue of fact on a motion for summary judgment to overcome it. So thankfully, we were able to do that, and the case did end up resolving after that.
And you're talking about Samsung, who's got some deep pockets.
Right.
When you're in a situation like that, I mean, maybe you're going in there by yourself or with some other person, and perhaps there's like a handful of people, a whole team. Are you comfortable in that situation, because you've gone through it so many times now?
I am now.
Yeah.
But to say that I've always been comfortable,
Yeah.
absolutely not. I mean, like my first trial example, right? I mean, so nervous. And then, you get into positions where it's new and you don't know. I'm not an engineer, so I didn't know anything about batteries and the lithium ion battery technology and what you needed to demonstrate that it was a Samsung battery, right? So you have to sort of develop your own team, get the right experts involved. And it's super, super, super important to have the right and good, solid support staff too, right? Like the lawyers, I get a lot of the credit, right, for a result, but it's really also the team that you develop behind you.
Yeah. Now, in terms of some of these injuries, what percentage-wise is it vehicle or dog bite, or how does that work out in your business?
I have a lot of motor vehicle accidents. There's just a lot of them, right? So stuff with wheels, cars, trucks, motorcycles, a lot of that stuff. A lot, actually, more recently, we've been getting a lot of cases of cars versus pedestrians. Like, you think you're a pedestrian in a crosswalk and you're safe, but, people have their heads up there,
Yeah,
so we get in a lot of those cases. Of course, a lot of slip and falls and trip and falls at grocery stores and stuff. I had a gnarly trip and fall case of a woman that was walking into a restaurant where she was actually employed, and a delivery company, on their pallet, they were delivering buttermilk cream, and they had dropped one and they didn't know it, and she slipped on it. And because she had diabetes and the way her kneecap was dislocated when she fell, it actually cut off blood flow to the lower half of her leg, and the tissue started dying and they couldn't fix it. So they had to do a complete vascular like reconstruction. So it's like, you think it's an ordinary trip and fall case, but you never know what you're going to get.
Yeah. How about dog bites? Are there a lot of those?
Decent amount of dog bites, but I would say a minority of my practice. We don't have too many dog bites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When those happen, I mean, are you successful if those people are liable in terms of like the owners or neglect or something like that?
Yeah. So the way it's set up in California is there's two types of dog bite claims. One is strict liability. So if you're the owner of the dog, or even if you have custody of the dog and it bites somebody, then you're strictly liable for it. But it doesn't necessarily mean you're liable under the theory of negligence. So we always allege both. I mean, strict liability is the easier one, right? Because you don't necessarily have to prove fault. Statute says you own the dog. This dog bites somebody, you're at fault for it. The harder, and generally they're in the more grievous circumstances, are the negligence claims, because the dog's got a history of biting people, right? Yeah. That's the one where the pit bull bites the kid's face, right? That doesn't just happen. There's an indication that that's possible, and the owners are negligent in taking measures to prevent that from happening.
And have you had those?
I've not had a pit bull bite a kid's face.
No, but I mean the negligent part.
Oh yeah, we've had like I said, we always allege strict liability and negligence, and sometimes it is the dog's first time. A lot of times it's not.
Yeah.
And again, that's one of those things you kind of figure out once you get into the facts.
With respect to some of the clients that you have and some of the cases that you've handled, have you had instances where they've been under surveillance?
Oh yeah.
And has that proven good for the other side?
Yes and no, right? Because the law says that if a defendant surveils a client, that's not privileged information. We're entitled to that prior to trial because we have a right to figure out who took the video and under what circumstances, and whether that snippet of the video that they want to show is actually accurate, right? Because they always want to get the guy throwing, the water from the grocery store, the gallons of water in his trunk, right? But they didn't realize that, like, he was moaning and struggling to lift it out of the cart. They don't want to show you that part of the video, right? So the law gives us some protection in that regard. But then again, defense lawyers want to still claim that it's privilege and not give it up, right? So then, of course, we're like, oh, crap, what's in the video, right? So is it successful? Sometimes it brings people to the table. But by the time of trial, most of the time that video has been disclosed.
At a deposition or something like that, or other ways?
Yeah, like, maybe you've had this happen before. Maybe you have gotten surveillance video of somebody, and maybe because you took the video, you're the person that lays foundation for it. So you get that deposition subpoena, right? And so then we get to assess your credibility, right? And the circumstances under which you took that video and get into all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes, other investigators will try to play doctor and say, it's like, come on, just take it and see what happens. But
I mean, we always have a joke in our office that insurance adjusters have every certification under the sun. They're MDs, they're lawyers, they're forensic accountants. They know everything.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
There's no point arguing with them because they know everything.
Yeah. So switching gears, if somebody, especially here in California, if somebody gets in an accident, what are the most important steps they should do, as soon as that happens?
The most important step that you can do is before the accident even happens. Make sure that you have the proper protections in the form of insurance coverage. Make sure you have collision coverage so that you can get your vehicle fixed. Make sure that you have underinsured or uninsured motorist coverage. So, God forbid you are severely injured, that you have a bucket of money that you can recover from. Make sure you have medical payments coverage. It's not that expensive. And health insurance doesn't cover a lot of stuff sometimes, right? You end up with a $10,000 plus patient portion on the bill. That could be ruinous to some people. I try to tell everyone, don't assume that other people out there are going to do the right thing, because there's a lot of people rolling around out there with minimum policies that provide not enough coverage. So that's something you can do even before the accident happens.
And then obviously, over the years, police response is not going to be there, even in, the small towns, if it's just property damage only. And so I think the client or the public, a lot of times, it's taken a while for them to understand that, because you go on the 405 and you see two cars and it's like, come on, but now everybody's clogged up because there was a fender bender in the number one lane. And so the best thing to do, go off to the side if you see if they'll respond. But I think a lot of people are, smart on the video cameras. Obviously Tesla's got video. You got to be very, very diligent if you're in an accident. The police will respond if there's injury, and obviously the ambulance will come, but it's incumbent upon people getting in those situations to take charge. But I love the fact that, hey, but before you even get in the car and fasten that seatbelt, you better have all this coverage, because you never know. But
it all stems from don't assume somebody else is going to do the right thing.
yeah,
And that includes when they admit at the scene that, oh, I'm at fault. Yeah, I'm at fault. Well, still collect the evidence to demonstrate that, because you may not be surprised how many stories change later on.
would you recommend somebody video and audio taping, that interaction?
Definitely.
Yeah. Wow.
Photographs of the vehicle's initial position, and then after it's moved, then make sure you can, in a safe place, get all of the photos of the damage. If you can get that confession, let's say, let's call it, on video. I once had a client, and he had a Tesla, so the car recorded everything as well, but he got out of the car with his video on, and he was like kind of shaking. You could see the video was shaky, but he recorded every aspect. He walked to every single person and got everything on video. And I thought that was brilliant.
It's amazing, yeah. And then if you could get some independent wits or video from the surrounding areas,
Right.
Because a lot of times we're brought in to investigate after, and we're hitting the gas stations and places to give us video.
Absolutely.
And for people listening, you got to get that stuff quick, because a lot of the storage is not going to be there. Either it'll last a couple days, a week. Not everybody's got a lot of storage on those video cameras. So what do you say the common mistakes would be that people make that negatively affect their injury claims?
I think a big one, and one that's pretty hard sometimes to overcome, is the I don't have any broken bones. I'm going to be all right. And so they wait a week, 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden, the pain sets in and it's unbearable, and they start treating and stuff. Well, what do you think in that when you present the claim and the adjuster sees those 2 weeks of nothing, right? And that they're going to say, oh, well, you got an attorney. And then all of a sudden you have pain and you have these injuries, and they'll start conjuring up this story, right? Yeah. But that could easily be avoided by just being preventative. Just go to the urgent care. Just put your complaints on record to protect yourself. If they go away and you don't have the pain and stuff, great. I mean, awesome. Good for you, right? Yeah. But if it keeps getting worse, at least you documented that. You've started that correctly.
Yeah. How do you explain the concept of pain and suffering to your clients?
Well, most of the time I don't really have to explain it to clients because they live it, right? It's more explaining it to the other side. And there's all kinds of analogies that lawyers have come up with, and jury consultants too have come up with. Like, you liken it to a Picasso painting, right? And the painting gets damaged, right? You throw some white paint on it and you ruin the whole thing, right? That has a tangible value, right? That's property. But why is the body any different? If you break somebody's leg, is that not more valuable than a painting, right? And so all these things have a pecuniary value. It's just, I think people are not accustomed to assigning a value. So it's just about shifting their perspective, right? They have no problem paying for a car, no problem paying for a medical bill, then you should have no problem paying for somebody's body too.
Yeah. Now, what should people keep in mind when they deal with these insurance companies after an accident?
Again, don't assume that they've got your best interest in mind, that they're out to help you, because they're not. They are not. I liken them to sheep's in wolves' clothing, or wolves in sheep's clothing, the other way around, because they come off as nice and, oh, we want to help you. We're going to do all these favors for you. But they're not. Trust me, they're not. I wouldn't have a job. I wouldn't be as busy as I am if that was what they were doing. Yeah.
Now, when you look at, did you always want to practice in California?
Yeah, I never really thought about going anywhere else. This is home, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, when you look at California versus other states, is California, do we have the highest number of accidents just because of the volume of vehicles? And
probably.
Yeah.
I don't know for sure statistics, but I mean, I bet as far as, like LA County, Orange County, basically Southern California, as compared to other locations, it's probably number one or right up there as far as the incident rate, just because, this is a very heavily reliant on motor vehicles, whereas some other places you got some public transport and stuff.
How about in terms of lawsuits? Does California have the highest number? Do we know that?
I don't know that for sure, but I know there's a lot of lawsuits, because I know when I get a trial date on a case, it's at least 1.5 years out.
Got it.
So the courts are certainly plugged up with not even just personal injury lawsuits, but all kinds of lawsuits.
Yeah. On the news, man, your competitors, well, I don't know if we really could call them your competitors, because, these, maybe they call them like the mill operations or something like that. I mean, you hear all these jingles and it sticks in your head the entire day. I don't want to sing it because I don't want to, I'm promoting you, not your competitors. But when you talk about personal injury, is it just because that volume and they're just trying to capture everybody, with the billboards and the radio and TV and all of that? I think it's probably the most advertised, obviously, throughout the world or country.
Heavily advertised, but especially here. And it is highly, highly, highly competitive. And some of the advertising that they do, including the jingles, I mean, it's damn catchy. Like, it definitely works. But I think the reason that that's done is because, there is certainly a segment of the population that has had an accident and you can like directly reach them. But for the most part, you're trying to be in somebody's head so that inevitably when that situation happens, they think of you first. So they do that. These larger firms are trying to do that through marketing and stuff. I try to do that by relationships. I have a network of people that I trust, like you, right? And we respect each other and know that, each other's going to do the right thing. And so hopefully when your friend gets in that auto accident, you say, hey, I know a guy who's going to help you and he's going to treat you right.
Yeah. Is there anything else that sets you guys apart, benchmark, from all these other people that their jingles are in their heads? People throw around boutique. Obviously when they call us as well, they're talking to me, they're talking to you. What else kind of sets you apart from these people that are massively advertising?
I try to change the conversation by focusing on values. And that's not because I don't have the experience, and, we want to communicate as well that we're going to do a bang up job. We're going to do the best that we possibly can, and we have the tools to do it. But at the same time, this is a really unique area because people are coming to you with some pretty serious trauma. And, if you as a father and a husband are injured and you can't provide for your family, right, because of your injuries, obviously you can imagine it dominoes from, it's not just a broken leg now, right? It's other stuff, right? Emotional stuff, relationship stuff. So I think people should have a soft landing zone, right? Somebody who's going to be compassionate and like understand that aspect of it too. So that's why I try to change the conversation. And the other thing that we do is intentionally, we keep our caseload reasonable. There's a temptation, sure, in any business, you want to grow. So let's just take that case. But we really try to be careful about the cases that we take, and that it's something that we can really add value, and it's not going to take away from the service that we offer our existing clients.
I imagine you're impacting lives, and you have since you started this, and to where they're never going to forget you, and maybe they're sending a text or a Christmas card or something like that. It's you're helping them out at something that's probably the craziest things that has ever happened to them. So yeah, I don't know why people wouldn't give that personal attention. Switching topics, if you had to choose a different path, what other career do you think you would have pursued?
When I was a kid, I wanted to be an architect for a while, but I suck at math. So that I'm creative, I think, but the math part really was, I never tried, so I don't know if I could have done it. I probably could have if I really put my mind to it. But the other thing that I thought about doing was like owning a car dealership. I love cars, so just to like be around cars every day. And then, in my mind, I thought if I owned a dealership, I could just have a garage full of the cars and I wouldn't have to pay for it, right? But obviously that's not how that works either. But
that's pretty cool. That would be cool. Any particular car?
For the most part, I like German cars, BMWs, Mercedes, Porsches. Those are cool. But I also like classic cars, like old Camaros. Some of the old Mustangs are pretty cool. Like old Lincolns, like the suicide doors kind of cars.
Yeah. The entourage car.
Yeah.
Is there just getting back to the defense stuff, what is one of the most unexpected or unusual defenses you've encountered in a case?
The most common is just like the denial and the lengths that people will go to lie, really, to cover up. I have a case where my client was a passenger in a vehicle, and I don't know why this happened because the passenger and the driver were friends, but the driver all of a sudden, started saying he wasn't in the car, and that just posed a whole bunch of problems because now the insurance companies are like, is this fraud? And so they, all the companies sent it to their special investigations unit, and they started doing these like deep dive investigations, and it just created a total hassle. But that one was just kind of crazy to me. Otherwise, the garden variety is like, that impact couldn't have caused you to need back surgery. Or, you, even though you're only 29, you had a complaint of back pain when you were 17. So obviously that's the cause of your injuries. That's the common stuff we get. Now,
are there any fictional attorneys from TV or film that you admire or enjoy watching?
I wouldn't say any one in particular, but what I admire about let's call them the TV and movie attorneys, is how easy they make it look.
Yeah.
If I could just walk into court and have a trial in one day and win, that'd be amazing. That just doesn't happen.
How about when anything like I'm Boston Legal, I like the Harvey Specter. Do you watch it, or do you not even pay attention?
Suits, of course. That's for the entertainment. I try not to like critique anything too much, and just for the entertainment value. But yeah, Harvey Specter's a badass.
Yeah. Lincoln Lawyer. Yeah.
The show or the movie, or both?
I say both. Yeah. All of it's great. What motivates you to continue advocating for injured clients?
Two things. The clients themselves, definitely. It's super cool when you win a case and you see how appreciative someone is. And I've had, like you said, I have changed some people's circumstances. I've been a part of being able to change people's circumstances. Like some people have used their settlements to buy houses that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to afford, right? So we kind of turned a horrible event into something that's positive. So that's really cool. The other thing is I really hate being told no. I don't like it when insurance companies like tell me no or tell my client that they're wrong. And that kind of just lights a fire. It makes me want to like fight. Because fighting's not easy all day long. You know, you take on people's problems and you're fighting with people all day long, every single day. That does take a toll. So like I need that fire to like, you know, get me ramped up.
Do you think the cases will be reduced when Tesla throws out the auto drive car?
It's possible.
Yeah.
But you know what? I've had 2 cases now with Teslas that have struck pedestrians on the road. So
on auto drive or we don't.
I don't know if it was on auto drive, but regardless, a lot of these Teslas are supposed to have like anti-collision detection, right? They're supposed to detect obstacles and stop. They didn't. So, you know, humans are faulty, but machines can be faulty as well.
Yeah. What advice would you give someone who's recently been injured and unsure where to begin? I know we've touched on it, but I'd like to hammer it home too.
I would say if it really is a serious situation and you don't know where to turn, don't be afraid to reach out to a lawyer. I mean, I think most personal injury lawyers will give free consultations and are happy to like, you know, at least just talk to you and give you some guidance. You know, you should exercise judgment about if you feel good about the person you're talking to on the other end, but just don't be afraid to reach out, I think is what I would say.
Now, speaking of reaching out, how can listeners get in touch with you and learn more about Benchmark Injury Law?
Visit our website, take a look at our social media, give us a call, stop by and visit. Like, we're pretty nice people.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you very much. This has been great. I really appreciate it.
Likewise.
I know you're busy. Likewise.